We are so pleased to have you join us virtually this morning. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to make an important land acknowledgement. For those of you that don't know about it, a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional territories. Today, we stand on ground occupied by ancient peoples whose history has been lost, but whose legacy remains. We are close to the mounds in Ashland and the Lower Shawnee Ceremonial Grounds in Greenup County. The earliest inhabitants have been referred to as the mound builders of the Adena, Hopewell, and Fort Ancient time periods. The Shawnee were the most recent inhabitants and were in Kentucky just prior to 1960. They shared Kentucky with the Cherokee in the southeast, the Yuchi in the south central, and the Chickasaw in the extreme western part of the state, sometimes peaceable and sometimes not so much. The evidence of these ancient people can be seen all over Kentucky through the mounds and artifacts left behind. Today, over 170 American Indian tribes are represented by their members living and working in the Commonwealth. Let us remember those who were here and those who are here remembering the vast array of gifts that they left us. Let us honor their presence, both past and present, as we strive to take care of this beautiful land and build on the legacy of stewardship they left for us into the 7th generation. It is my pleasure to introduce Scott Alvey, Executive Director of the Kentucky Historical Society, and I would like to thank Scott for your partnership in hosting today's webinar. It's a wonderful opportunity to have our two agencies in the Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet collaborate on this program. Welcome, Scott.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. It's such a pleasure to be here. And Emily, also want to thank you for helping us to organize this webinar and for the invitation for KHS to participate. I'm thrilled that each of the panelists not only share a passion for Kentucky history, but they are directly involved in helping the Kentucky Historical Society to fulfill its mission to educate and engage through Kentucky history in order to meet the challenges of the future. Gerald, I believe it was in late May or early June when I last spoke with you, and if I recall at the time, we were all working through multiple challenges, right? Pandemic, work, family, school, and of course, confronting systemic racism and social injustice. And in my talk with Gerald, I remember admitting that I knew we needed to address changes within our organization, but also what would be that role the Kentucky Historical Society would play during this historic moment. So as we begin our conversation, let us remember a few things. Number one, we are surrounded by history. I was here as a great opportunity to recognize history where it is. As a public history institution, if we are going to encourage a process that allows for natural self-discovery of our shared history, we must do better to invest in a community's marginalized history. Another thing, if our relevance comes from being empowered by history, through our authenticity, we must find answers that give us a call to action. But we also must recognize that we may be telling a factual and accurate history of Kentucky's African-American communities. Without their voice, we fail to capture the humanity and the personal experience of the people in those histories. Recognizing our shared history will play a significant role to bring us together, acknowledge our difference, and show us that understanding through history will make us stronger. I appreciate everybody's participation in today's conversation, and thank you for allowing the Kentucky Historical Society to be a part of it.
Good morning, and thank you all for being with us today. I am Emily Moses, Executive Staff Advisor for the Kentucky Arts Council and producer of the Kentucky Creative Industry Summit Series. Due to pandemic conditions, the Arts Council will not have our annual in-person summit this year. Rather, we will present webinars like this one throughout the year. More information will be available soon, including recordings of all webinars in the series on the Arts Council's website. The Kentucky Historical Society and Kentucky Arts Council are thrilled to co-sponsor and present this webinar. The I Was Here project is an entry point for citizens to engage with the foundation of the American experience. The project combines art and history to examine wounds of the past with the goal of creating a shared humanity for our future.
Chris, Scott, Emily, on behalf of the I Was Here project, We thank you for the support and partnership in making this opportunity to share possible. Hello and welcome, everyone. I welcome both those who are attending live as well as those who will be watching the recording later. We are excited for the opportunity to share the I Was Here project with you. Here you can see some of our partners and staff. Let's meet our panelists. I am Marshall Fields, Community Liaison with the I Was Here project. Then we have Mary Quinn Raymer, President of VisitLex. And then we have Marjorie Guyon, the I Was Here project artist. I also want to introduce to you Mandy Higgins from the Kentucky Historical Society, where she acts as a community engagement administrator. We're also lucky enough to have with us Dr. Gerald Smith. Dr. Smith is a history professor at the University of Kentucky, noted author, and co-chair of Lexington's Commission for Racial Justice and Equity. A big thank you to all of our panelists. Marjorie, let's start with you. Please take a few moments and tell us what the beginning looked like for I Was Here.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Imagined in 2016 and launched in Cheapside, once one of the largest auction sites in America, the project began as a collaboration between me, photographer Patrick Mitchell, and poet Nikki Finney. It started really as a vision, a mother and child appearing and disappearing in the windows surrounding Cheapside Square. And it has grown organically over the past 4 years. Although it performs many functions, it is essentially a project created to shift the spirit of the country. At the heart of this work is a set of ancestor spirit portraits. We see these portraits as emblematic images of a beautiful, dignified, and holy people. Patrick Mitchell is an incredible photographer. He's responsible for the visual foundation of the project. This visual foundation was created with contemporary African Americans transformed into representative ancestors: father, mother, sister, brother, guardian, and memorial. At the heart of the project is the concept of connection. How can we find a way to connect to each other? Historians draw connections between the installations of spirit portraits and the historical foundation of our country. In honoring a piece of the human puzzle that makes us who we are engaged in this precious human work of looking both behind and looking forward.
Thank you. The project is indeed an entry point for citizens to engage with the past through art. Dr. Smith, as author of Lexington, Kentucky Black America series, would you share some of your insights on how I Was Here installations create a link between geography and history?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Marshall, and to everyone that's listening in. In 1983, I wrote a master's thesis on the civil rights movement in Lexington, Kentucky from 1945 to 1980. It became very apparent to me that for generations there had been selective documentation, interpretation, and even memory of Lexington's past that had either excluded or misrepresented the African American community. So as a native son, I was very troubled that the Black experience had not been told. As a historian, I had combed through many primary and secondary sources. I'd examined city directories, I'd conducted oral histories, listened to recorded interviews, I'd definitely combed through many photographic collections. And it was clear to me that particularly when it came to African Americans in this community, they had been historically invisible. And so for me, the question was how to bring this history alive. And so I thought about a photographic history that would be informative and interesting, a way of demonstrating that African Americans had shaped a world of their own within the discriminatory spaces which had been reserved for them. So the book was intended essentially to reach deep into the heart and soul of the Black community, capture its pride, its fortitude, its dignity, even the intra-racial diversity often reflected in race, class, and gender. So geography was critically important in terms of capturing the lives of domestic and agricultural workers, skilled and unskilled workers, as well as professionals and common laborers. As I was working through the book, I tried to include the names of persons in most of the photographs, but there were a number of photographs that I was not able to document the names of individuals. Images of Black men and women at work or at school or protesting racial inequality, all a part of that project. Their struggles, their sacrifices, and their spirit was worth seeing in pictures. And so, I'm really honored to be a part of this project and see that work being carried forth in even a larger way.
Thank you. I Was Here synthesizes a wealth of humanities and historical scholarship, many of which Dr. Smith just spoke about. It is so easy for this wealth of knowledge to be overlooked. Mary Quinn, as president of VisitLex, can you share your perspective on how this project brings the past into view?
Yes, thank you, Marshall. Of course, Lexington is known throughout the world for its horses and its bourbon, and we are very proud of those two signature industries. But at VisitLex, we want folks to understand that when we welcome guests into our community, there's much more that we want to showcase than just our horses and our bourbon. And part of what we get a great thrill in connecting with folks about is our history and our culture. And we feel like we've got a rich history right here in Lexington, and it speaks directly to this place. And it's very specific to us. And so our heritage, who we were and where we came from, provides great context for the city that we are living in today. As Dr. Smith was noting just prior, some of that history is very complicated and very ugly, and there are wounds that need healing. So at VisitLex, we see an opportunity for this art, for these spirit portraits and this project to engage our visitors with our past in a way that allows healing and also allows an opportunity to truly connect the shared humanity among us.
Excellent. I Was Here is a means to engage America in a conversation about our shared humanity, a vision for a more perfect union. Here we see an installation of I Was Here ancestor spirit portraits in the lobby of the Government Center in Lexington, Kentucky. They are placed where Mayor Linda Gordon holds press conferences. This is where citizens from all walks of life enter the building. Welcoming the ancestor spirit portraits, and that occurring by the mayor and the city council, it sends a message that in the recognition of the past, we want to work to create a more perfect union. That these portraits are clearly visible when she's addressing the city is so powerful. Public spaces are crucial installation spots because they are open to all and provide an opportunity to influence public discourse and help redefine how we see each other. Marjorie, your work has been described as visual poetry. Can you share how some technical aspects of the spirit portraits deliver a metamorphic message?
Well, the project relies almost entirely on reproduction of the original images. And most likely the way that we're doing this is on translucent fabric. What this creates is an opportunity to see from both sides, whether you are on the outside looking in or on the inside looking out. You can see the images from both sides. It creates a visual metaphor. We have to see this wound in the soul of our country from both inside and outside. The translucency of the fabric speaks of the spirit, that light can come through, that spirit can inhabit us. Something I'd like to share as well is that there are no signatures in this body of work. We've said from the start that it's a spirit project. The pieces were signed by thumbprint in a signing ceremony on the second floor of a restaurant that has one of the portraits in their front window. Small plates of paint were set out for everyone: brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, photographer, poet, artist, each one thumbprint. As the project continues to grow, there is an opportunity for others to add a metaphoric thumbprint, because here's the deal. In the end, it will require all of us to bring our best to this vision of who we could be to each other.
Agreed. Marjorie, share some of the upcoming developments for I Was Here.
I Was Here will be launching an historic walking tour in the coming months, the basis of which can travel from city to city. The National Endowment of the Arts grant and funding from Wells Fargo are helping to create a significant installation of ancestor spirit portraits throughout downtown Lexington. The tour will synthesize history, geography, narratives, musical composition, and opera at 21 historically significant sites. The project is collaborating with students and educators from Fayette County Public Schools, the Kentucky Historical Society, Kentucky Endowment for the Humanities, Lexington Children's Theater, musicians from Paris and Los Angeles. The list goes on and on. We are thrilled to be working with so many collaborators because we believe that as the minds and voices of many join, we embody this idea of a more perfect union, bringing the synthesis of history, humanities, and the arts onto the street is a means to deliver significant humanities, arts, and performing arts content in this age of COVID. Work that previously was available only to ticket holders can now be seen by the public in these on-the-street museums.
I will say this age of COVID has caused a lot of us to work and increase our strategy. The project is indeed a strategic and historically accurate approach, bringing a visual history into view. Citizens come face to face with a history lesson that is rarely, if ever, encountered on the streets of America. Bringing history to life requires that we bring it to where the people are. There isn't a state or city in America where this project cannot find a home. One goal being that we reframe our understanding of citizenship through conversations that lead us to see each other more clearly and create opportunities for interactions that lead to engagement versus exclusion. Based on archival records, the enslavement of African Americans touched almost every corner of the country. Dr. Smith, can you elaborate on the wound of slavery and how who we were affects who we are?
Well, first of all, I begin by saying that, make no mistake about it, that slavery was a very brutal, oppressive economic system. In fact, there was a Kentucky enslaved person who actually became a fugitive by the name of Henry Bibb from Shelbyville, Kentucky. In his 1849 narrative, made this comment that no tongue nor pen ever has or can express the horrors of American slavery. And I think that was a very profound statement because the statement clearly demonstrates that slavery inextricably into the American fabric of our history. Slavery has guided us politically, socially, culturally, economically, ideologically. It's at the foundation of our Constitution in terms of how it is recognized. American presidents and Supreme Court justices on slavery, but also in terms from the structure of our international economy. Slavery helped to build this economy based on the production of cotton and hemp and sugar and rice and tobacco, of course. There were enslaved people in 1860 valued at $3 billion. And so with that being said, I remember a number of years ago, there was a distinguished scholar by the name of Ira Berlin, who has written extensively about slavery. And Berlin had this comment, he said, quote, "Slavery is ground zero of race relations," which simply means that, when we start talking about the 21st century, we have to return, back to this institution of slavery. When I think about slavery and how it affected, both blacks and whites, it reflects the inequalities, the myths, the stereotypes that continue to divide us but of course were planted during this period of slavery, and the remnants of slavery continue to exist. And I think that's one of the things that this project will definitely reveal.
I definitely agree. In many cities in America, citizens have opposing views of historical landmarks. VisitLex is located in the old Lexington courthouse. It is an architecturally beautiful structure. Yet, on this site, African-American ancestors were bought and sold. Despite the history, it has become a place where I feel welcome. VisitLex made a decision to install many of the portraits like the two shown here. Mary Quinn, would you mind to share some thoughts on this project and how it relates to the role of visitors bureaus?
As you mentioned, Marshall, our visitor center is located at what many would consider to be ground zero for the slave trade in Lexington. And the decision to move our visitor center into this space was not one that was made without a lot of careful thought about the history of the place that we would be calling home. And for us, we felt an opportunity and perhaps even a conviction that this was a path forward, that we might be able to breathe new life and a new narrative into this block, the 21st century version that would allow people to genuinely feel welcome. The root word for hospitality actually comes from the Latin word hospice, which means to welcome and to entertain. And so what we wanted to do in a very symbolic manner was say, on this particular block, in this particular city, all are welcome. We talk a lot about gracious hospitality at our staff meetings and how we can extend that to those that we welcome into our doors. But I think for us, we've even come to realize in recent months that we have the opportunity to move from gracious hospitality to courageous or even radical inclusion. That we say, not only are you welcome here, but you belong here. And so we see this opportunity to be in this space actually as a great blessing and a way for us to play a small part in healing the wounds from the past.
Well, as I present this and help to host this webinar, I am sitting in one of the many conference rooms here at VisitLex. And I will tell you, I do feel 100% welcome, and I appreciate that. To build off of that, here are images installed in the third floor windows overlooking Cheapside, overlooking what would have been a slave auction site. Dr. Smith, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Cheapside?
Yes, of course, the name Cheapside has its origins out of London, England. It simply means a marketplace. And of course, there, adjacent to the courthouse, was this marketplace, a place where cattle and horses and, of course, slaves were sold. It was a busy environment. It was crowded. It was noisy. There was a lot of drinking and smoking. But initially in the early 1800s, it was a spot for athletic contests. Very quickly, however, it becomes the spot where we have the largest slave trading activity taking place in the state of Kentucky, and some would even say throughout the South, as thousands of enslaved people were actually marched to that environment and placed on the auction block, especially a number of young children and women who were sold in this space. So when we think about Cheapside and the history, and you think about the terror, the tears, the humiliation, the oppressiveness that took place in that particular geographic space, one is reminded of how African Americans were looked upon and how they were treated historically in the heart of Lexington.
The streets of a city they're breathing and they're living. Marjorie, how can a visual for history introduce concepts into consciousness? Why is this important?
One of the foundational ideas of the project is to create on-the-street museums. I grew up in New York, and I was in and out of, when I was very, very little, the Museum of Modern Art. What I saw over and over became part of my consciousness. What we wanted to do with this project is to bring this kind of layered thinking, a merging of the arts and humanities and history to the public, rather than asking the public to come to it. The idea is to install the project into public spaces where people are in order to make these images as recognizable as like a can of Coca-Cola or the Marlboro Man, a set of emblematic ancestor spirit portraits, dignified, beautiful, powerful, and holy. They say that you have to do something for 21 days in order for it to become a habit. How many times do we have to see something before it becomes a concept that we carry within us? How can we nourish our children and each other? How can we teach to see differently?
You're right. And, you know, it will take a village of cities and states to shift the spirit of the nation. Mandy, please talk to us about this image.
So this is the Winchester Sun building. It's a newspaper for Clark County and Winchester, and it sits across from Clark County's courthouse. Marjorie, when the project was taken to Clark County, wanted these images to look onto the courthouse as a symbolic moment for folks to think about how the courthouse today still acts as a place of difference and systemic problems. In that, the courthouse can often act as another wound site in the 21st century. And so this project is not just in the past, but in the present, to talk about how our ancestors were involved in the enslavement of Africans on American soil, and how this continues, the legacy of this can continue within a justice system that can be unjust for many of our fellow Kentuckians and our fellow Americans, and having these images to juxtapose against that in the building where news happens and where communities learn about themselves allows for that very visual representation that Marjorie was just talking about.
Thank you. So now we're going to take a look at a video sharing some words from our team as well as our supporters.
I Was Here is a multi-artistic collaboration to pay homage to the spirit of the people who were enslaved and ran through one of the biggest slave markets in the country right here in Lexington, Kentucky.
One of the aims of it is to create permanent memorials of ancestor spirits in the places where they were bought and sold, and in doing so, to begin to find a way for us to see each other differently and begin to develop a humanity that's shared.
The effort to save the soul of the country, save the soul of the nation, I think it's not an exaggeration. Because the history of slavery in this country is part of an issue, and it's a stain on the soul of the country. And we simply, for many reasons, have not even confronted this. So this is part of a very, very important movement that I see going on across the country to address this, because I think unless we address this and address this collectively, then we never get past it. This is an important contribution to that, because it does engage people in a very creative way. And that effort moves us closer to that dialogue and ultimately that action, whatever action that flows out of that is ultimately where it's at.
So, typically by now, many leaders are interested in the how of the project. From a high level, here are three main aspects I'd like to share. One, local historians are located throughout the Kentucky Historical Society to pinpoint areas of historical pain and progress. A map and legend are created. Sites are chosen for installation of ancestor spirit figures. And then lastly, ancestor spirit portraits are installed and the community invited to a ceremony to sanctify and acknowledge the wound. Dr. Smith, being a local historian gives you a vantage point into sites of significance. Please share some of your knowledge as it relates to Lexington and the global importance of educating citizens about the spiritual geography of their city.
Well, one of the things that I've learned about Lexington's African-American history is that it's important to go behind the scenes. I teach a course on the Kentucky African-American experience, and during that course, I take my students on several field trips. Before the end of the class, we take a field trip around the city of Lexington. And one of the geographic lessons that I want the students to learn about is the historic Black pockets in the community that were created in the 1860s and 1870s, Brucetown, Prawltown, Smithtown, and others, to get a sense of where those historic Black pockets are located, but not only that, to know that they still exist, and they exist not only in Lexington, but you can travel in other cities in the South as well as the North. And one of the things that becomes apparent to the students as they view these spaces is that these historic Black pockets were typically located near stockyards and railroad tracks and cemeteries. But then they also noticed that there are larger homes that were owned by whites that would line the larger streets of Lexington, North Broadway, 5th Street and 6th Street. And those were homes that would be facing the street. But behind the larger homes were these smaller shotgun houses that were built on narrow streets and in the alleys of Lexington. And this is where you'll find those African Americans who are either working on farms or working as domestics or in some other servile kind of position. And so the point is that when we look at the African American experience, we find that Blacks were often in the background and not in the foreground. Even in photographs, when there are images of Blacks and whites together, you see African Americans in the shadow, and that continues to play out even in the spaces that were occupied.
You know, few things are more engaging than getting to walk the talk. Mandy, can you help me shed some light on how Kentucky Historical Society will act as a link to local historical societies and how this project is an opportunity to bring a visual to a lived experience?
Yeah, just as Dr. Smith was so beautifully saying, so much of our history is there in front of us if we're willing to look for it. And one of my great pleasures of the Kentucky Historical Society is to oversee some of the outreach that we do and making sure that we are marking historically significant sites and that folks in communities are able to share that. And so one of my roles for this project will be, if you're in Kentucky, to help identify some local folks that you can work with through our network of county and local historical organizations and local historians. Will also be to help highlight some places where you can find information, like the Kentucky African American Encyclopedia that Dr. Smith was an editor on, and other resources. If you are outside of Kentucky, I can also sort of help you with that, with a national network of state historical societies who also do this sort of work, and to just talk through the process of how we're doing that here and how you could do that as well where you are. And what I would really like to just highlight very quickly is this map, this walking tour. As Dr. Smith was saying, he takes his students on one in Lexington. This is possible in most communities, and it's something that really makes this project come alive, that as I was here is installed throughout the city, they're very thoughtfully choosing spots of both pain and progress to have those conversations and then to visually walk them to walk in the past and in the footsteps of our ancestors, and to do that with history in mind. And so working very thoughtfully with locals to make that possible.
The land is the same dirt from years ago, but the buildings change. Marjorie, tell us about the process of working with the property owners.
Well, when we first began, we didn't even really have a project. We just had a vision. And we knew that this area of Creekside was going to be where we started. And so we appealed to property owners on the basis of history to bring a visual to the past. Business and property owners are essential to this process. They are our partners in the creation of an on-the-street museum. And the wonderful thing about business and property owners is they have autonomy over their spaces. They can decide. So when we first began, of course, they were asking, how long will this be up? And we just told them 3 weeks, because nobody really knew when 3 weeks began and when 3 weeks ended. And later, when some of them came back and said, you said 3 weeks, it's been 5 months. I said, well, we said 3 weeks, but we really meant permanently. And some of the property owners from the initial installation have taken their pieces down, but most people kept them up. And what happens now is that people are coming to us and saying, can we please be part of the project? But now when we install the pieces, we install them with the understanding that they are part of a cultural humanity project that honors those who have come before us. So these are really permanent installations.
Once the local historians have outlined sites and the property owners have signed on, it takes about 2 months to create a map, design, and complete the installation. Dr. Smith, I spoke earlier about the significance of the ancestor spirit portraits in public places. Please share your perspective as a historian. Please share your point of view.
Well, you know, in response to that question, we have to keep in mind that there are so many places in Lexington, Kentucky, where if you're a white Lexingtonian, you don't even have to see a Black person. You know, where you live, where you work, where you grocery shop, where you dine, you have no interaction with a person of color whatsoever. And so with that in mind, you know, these particular images will allow individuals to elevate their level of racial consciousness. And that's so important because what the images will do will relocate Blacks from the margins of history to important diverse spaces in the community. For so long, African Americans have been excluded politically, excluded politics, business, even social and cultural events. And because of this historical marginalization, it's very important that we do all we can to make sure that the citizens of Lexington know that African Americans were not only here in the past, but they're here in the present, and they continue to have a place in this community that can no longer be denied. The project is not about, obviously, political correctness, but it's about correcting a framework that needs to be reconstructed and reevaluated and has been misplaced, misused, and abused, stolen, denied, betrayed for far too long.
Well said. Seeing the importance after the fact and being the first in line are two very different things. Mary Quinn, what led you to the decision to request the ancestor spirit portraits in the old courthouse?
Well, Marshall, as I mentioned, we thought long and hard about where we were going to be moving our new visitor center and our administrative offices. And we were really committed to this idea that we wanted to bring a new narrative to this block and to this building, as has been referenced by Dr. Smith and Mandy. Sometimes courthouses can be just as oppressive as old systems that we've had to deal with. And so we really wanted to create new life in this space. And I think that's something that's shared among the other tenants that now call this old courthouse home. And as Marjorie mentioned, there were portraits going up all around us. And so for us to not have portraits in this building, we felt like we would be conspicuously missing. And we wanted a very outward demonstration of what was happening inside the building. And we wanted people to be able to see these portraits, to be able to see this is in fact a place where I am welcome. And so at that point, we approached the management of this building and said, we would really love to see this happen. This matters a great deal to us. And we're all personally invested in it, and we hope you will be too. And as you can see by the picture on the screen, we were able to get several portraits installed at the old courthouse.
You know, the installations themselves, they can take 1 to 3 weeks, depending upon the number and the ease of site access. You know, here we see Barry from our installation department installing a portrait of my mother in a conference room located at the North Side branch of the Lexington Public Library. This is powerful for me on multiple levels. Obviously, my mother is a part of the project, but secondly, I grew up all over Lexington. As a kid, I don't recall seeing many people who look like me on school posters or in public spaces. The Northside Library is actually located in a historically African-American residential neighborhood consisting of, many different areas. Green Acres and Winburn stick out. It brings me great pleasure to know that this project will be seen by children that do and do not look like the spirit portraits, yet they'll have the opportunity to see themselves, see their sisters, their brothers, their mothers, fathers, or their grandfathers and grandmothers. In addition to the images that have been curated that can accompany the installations, the legend that accompanies the map provides a walking tour complete with the history of place. Mary Quinn, how has VisitLex helped share this information?
Well, I should just say that VisitLex feels very blessed that we have really been invited to be on this journey from the very beginning. One of the ways that we've been able to sort of take our relationship to the next level is not only to say that we're supportive of the project financially and that we lobbied the management of the building to allow these portraits to be displayed, but also that we became on-the-ground ambassadors for the art and for the project. And so in our visitor center on the ground level, we have marketing collateral that gives visitors and locals alike the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the portraits, about the project. And it also allows our staff to serve as on-the-ground ambassadors for what we're trying to do here, which has been mentioned many times, really shift the spirit of this country.
It definitely takes a village. Another powerful impact of how the project engages citizens is the sanctification ceremony to bless sacred places. Here are images from a community gathering outside the old courthouse, which included song and prayer. Another aspect of the I Was Here project is our supporters. Marjorie, you have been very involved in garnering support and helping to build the momentum for this project. Can you share some of that story?
Yes, I'll happily do that. We started with nothing but a vision. And the day that we started the photo shoots, I talked with John Hayes, who is a lawyer at Jackson Kelly. And John Hayes said, whatever you need, we're there for you. And from Jackson Kelly, Kentucky Arts Council and VisitLex were our first financial supporters. I called Wells Fargo in Lexington on a Friday afternoon and talked with Cindy Dees. I said she probably wouldn't be interested, but would she mind if I just took a minute of her time? And she said, yes, I'll give you a minute. And after I talked to her for a minute, she said, send me everything that you have. Cindy has become a key force in this project, as well as a cherished friend. Wells Fargo has been very generous in their support. Doug Tattershaw at the Lexington Public Library has become another important ally and friend of the project. The Kentucky Historical Society, the NEA, Kentucky Endowment for the Humanities, Bluegrass Community Foundation, the relationships that have developed and are continuing to develop are essential to this project. In the end, it will take all of us. It will take our very best minds and the skills that we have spent decades honing to shift the spirit of the country. We need you all.
I agree 110%. As promised, here's our contact information as well as the I Was Here website. On behalf of the I Was Here project team, I thank all of the panelists for giving their time to put together and participate in this panel presentation. I also thank our partners like Kentucky Arts Council, Kentucky Historical Society, VisitLex, and all of our partners that help bring attention to our shared humanity. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope that you will be a part of shifting the spirit of the nation toward one of empathy and understanding. Thank you for attending.